morning, guys. It's a very strange morning. It's also a very cold morning, which is why I'm wearing a hat. So basically, I am basically finished, apart from this one final bolt. So I'm out here this morning to put the finishing touches to the explosive, and then we'll take her into the sunshine where it's a bit warmer out there, and I will give you a bit of a tour around what she consists of. Yeah, I look like I got out of bed and didn't have a shower and just put a hat on. Anyway, right. So let's grab it. That was it. That was the last bolt. So I'm all finished. Let's take it for a spin. Of course, when I take it for a spin, I don't mean I'm going to ride it anywhere, because this bike is not for riding. This is going to go on a wall for the rest of my life. But let's get it out and show you what's what anyway. Getting this bike finished has been a labour of love. It's been over a year since I started this now. I think it was December 2017 that I picked this up. Anyway, it's been a very long time. And it's now January 2019. When I first got this bike, it was a complete state. I didn't take any video of it back then, but I have got some pictures. Have a look at that. It was basically a barn find. It was a wreck. Fortunately, most of the paint was pretty good. The graphics had it, and as you probably know by now, the graphics on this bike actually lie under the paint. So that took a lot of work. But the real labour of love was actually getting the componentry right. This bike is not the exact spec it had generally from the factory. Back in 1990, this bike shipped with Suntour XC Comp, which is roughly equivalent to XT. However, mine, for some unknown reason, when I had it in 1990, probably because it was I bought mine later in the year, I guess they were low on stock of XC Comp, so mine came with full XC Pro. And XC Pro was the first sort of manufacturer foray into super high-end componentry. So, I mean, you've got your XTRs and your XX1s and those sorts of things these days. XC Pro was definitely sitting at that kind of level, even back then in 1990. It was very expensive stuff. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you around the bike, top to bottom, tip to toe, and show you what components it's got on it and give you a closer look. So I'm going to start at the front, at the top, in the cockpit area. Now, there's a few things on this bike that haven't been replaced. There's some original components on here as well, and I'm going to talk you through some of those as well. One of them is this velocity stem. Now that was absolutely destroyed. It was wrecked, the graphics were all ripped off, and it was rusty. And that was stripped back to metal, resprayed, had new graphics made for it by Gil at Retro Decals. And then it went back to the paint shop and they were lacquered under, so that is now indestructibly well painted. It's as good as it was when it was new. I've reused the original stem bolt, which has got a little bit of what they call patina in there, just a little bit of retro reminder that it is an old bike. So this bike is indeed basically 30 years old. So what else have we got in here? So this was the year that underbar shifting became a thing. So prior to these, you had thumb shifters. These are called Suntour Express levers, and for my money, they were great. So these are new old stock. I've sourced most of the components on this bike from all around the world, as far away as Australia, the States, Canada, Germany, the Czech Republic, you name it. I've been shopping there to get the bits and bobs together. So whilst the stem was done locally, most of the other stuff has come from elsewhere. So these Express shifters, anyway, basically these had this interesting system where you push one and the other one shifts back in the opposite direction towards you. So every time you make a shift, the larger lever pops outwards. And that meant you could always get lots of good pressure on them, because things didn't work quite as smoothly back in the old days, it has to be said. Around the front here, you've got new old stock Suntour XC Pro brake levers. As you can see, these are basically full finger brake levers. They're designed to run with 2 fingers if you want, but you could definitely fit 3 on there. They're not short levers, as you can see. They're not like the modern sort of equivalents where you have a very, very short lever, because you need that leverage, because you are tugging on a cable which is basically operating an old-fashioned rim brake. Now these are lower profile, but they are still cantilevers really. The front one is a fairly standard kind of brake, nothing unusual at all. But when we come to talk about the back of the bike, you'll see there's something a bit funky going on back there. So anyway, we've got new old stock brakes. I've even managed to get contributed to this project some Suntour original cable hangers, and the brakes themselves actually came with the original new old stock brake cables as well, so that's pretty cool. So that's the front of the bike. Now that all plugs in obviously to the headset. Now this is not an original part, this wouldn't have come on the bike when it was new. This is an XC Pro headset, so I've gone for full XC Pro throughout the bike. Now one of the cool things about XC Pro, as you'll see as we move downwards, let's go and look at the front hub. So front hub of this bike, obviously again, is XC Pro. And if I get in here, can you see in here, this is a grease port. And all you need to do is you press a grease gun against that, give it a squeeze, and it drives the old grease out, puts new grease in for you. And that is standard on all the parts of this group set. So not just the hubs, but also the headset. Basically you push aside these rubbers on the headset, I don't know whether you can see those. They push aside, and beneath that you've got a grease port. Then you head down to the bottom bracket, and again in the centre of the crank you've got a grease port. That's what that little gold label means. So basically you could service the whole bike in terms of bearings without dismantling them, which is something which still doesn't seem to happen today, which is very frustrating. So that's the brakes and the hubs. So while we're talking about the hubs, let's also talk about the wheels. So these wheels are Campagnolo ATEC. Again, this is not an original component. Originally they had some much more, let's say, industrial rims, which I destroyed almost immediately when I bought my bike originally. However, I replaced my wheels with a set of Suntour Thor rims, which I've not been able to get hold of. So these are the closest equivalent I could find, but I think they look pretty cool because with those graphics they go quite nicely with the paint job. So the paint has been restored throughout by hand. Now I haven't resprayed it. I didn't want to respray it. I wanted to keep the original paint because it was all pretty good. So what I've done is where it needed touching up, I've touched up by hand. Where it needed graphics replacing, which was basically everywhere, the graphics have been replaced with reproductions, which took many weeks of work with retro decals to get those right. And then I've had to re-splatter over the graphics to make them all match in, which has taken quite a bit of TLC. There's a few graphics that are original. So for example, this down here, this Prestige Concept label, that would have been on the bike when it was new, and as you can see it's a little bit tired, but you can't get repros of them. Not in they've got a foil finish, and they're just not available in a foil finish, so I wanted to keep the original one. Similarly, I've also kept the original designed by Joe Murray labels because they couldn't be reproduced. They just don't look right on the reproductions. And also TBG is what Kona originally traded under, as I understand it. So the bicycle group was Kona and Brody bikes, and back in these days Kona were a very, very well respected brand with a very high quality Canadian production. So this is actually I mean, it's built in Japan, but these bikes were very, very highly respected. They were one of the first things that brought out more modern looking geometry. And if you look at the geometry of this bike, okay, it's a little bit shorter than a current bike, but what you do have is you have a relatively slack head angle for the time, with a long head tube that gives you a quite high front end, a very aggressively sloping top tube, and yeah, it's got aggressive geometry. That's why Kona's developed the way they did. They ended up being very much the more, sort of the aggressive bike of their time. So anyway, heading backwards. So we've got this is actually the original quick release on here as well. So we've kept that one, and this is a Singletrack Flight Titanium. Now this is not the original seat. The original seat it came with was an Avocet. I couldn't get hold of one of those. However, when my Avocet wore out, I replaced it with the Singletrack Flight. So that's why that one's on there as well. And that was the seat de rigueur of the early 90s. Now, if we go downwards from here, you can actually see what I was talking about before. So this is the back brake. And as you can see, this is what's called a self-energizing system. Now basically what that means is, as the wheel rotates, the brake pushes into the rim, but as the rim rotates past it, it drags it on like a little track inside, slightly inwards towards the rim. So you pull on the lever, but as the lever pulls the cable in, the contact of the brake against the rim actually drags the brake inwards, as opposed to keep leaving it parallel with the wheel. So you can actually see, as I turn this, you can actually see it, hang on, there we go, you can actually see it extending as it turns. So, clever piece of kit, does absolutely nothing. Useless. But hey, that's the original brakes, so that's what's ended up on it. But I replaced them back in the day with XTs, I think, back then, or maybe, I can't remember, D or 2s? No, I can't remember. So, obviously, matching rim at the back as well. We've got the Campag 8X, and we're also talking about that. Let's talk about the tyres as well. So these are reissues. These are not original tyres. So the smoke at the back, which is very much a recognisable tread pattern that you'll still see on a lot of tyres today, was a very well respected tyre of its time. And at the front, similarly to Maxxis these days, and many other tyres, you've got a front specific tyre, which is called the Dart, because it has a dart shaped tread. So it's a directional tread at the front and a driving tread at the back. Again, not the original tyres. The original tyres were a set of Kona tyres, which I've just not been able to source. Retro tyres are ridiculously expensive things, and that particular model I've not been able to get anywhere. What I've done is I've kept the original chainrings. So we've got new old stock Suntour XC Pro cranks, but I've kept the original chainrings. And the reason I've done that is because these chainrings that are fitted to this bike, there's a little bit of wear on them, but they're basically the original chainrings from 1990. And look at that little ring, it's barely had any use at all. It's crazy. So triple chain set, obviously, as was the way. Suntour XC Pro front mech, again new old stock. Suntour Powerflow cassette at the back, which is 7-speed. 7-speed was on its, I think, second year in 1990. I think it arrived in 1989. I think with the bikes that season. So before that, you had 18 gears. So this was a 21 geared bike, and this is driven by a Suntour XC Pro rear mech. And you can see that what I was saying about the high end kind of appeal of these things. Look how shiny, like a treasure from a sunken pirate wreck. That's so sexy. And one other thing that's really cool that I'm really pleased about is I've been able to restore and keep the original chain. So there's a little bit of wear on this, obviously you can see it's not new, but look at that. That is the original chain that this bike rolled out of the factory with, which I think is cool as. So Suntour XC Pro bottom bracket in there as well. Of course that is a cup and cone bottom bracket. No sealed units back then. This was before the sealed units appeared, but as you can see, it's all brand new. Still got all the original frame labelling down here, so I've left that on as well. And got the chain guide running under the bottom bracket there. One of the things I have unfortunately had to sacrifice was the grease nipple that used to sit underneath that bottom bracket. I could not get that to fit with any of the bottom brackets that were available, so I've taken that off. So then moving on to the graphics, like I was talking about, these are all reproduction graphics. They took a lot of work to get the right colours and the right sizes, because the problem was that when I removed the original graphics, the spaces were very, very obvious. There was quite a deep step in the lacquer on the bike, which was going to cause an issue, so I had to make sure that the graphics fitted exactly. So Retro Decals did a very, very good job of helping me out with getting those suited out for the correct sizing and the right colouring and various other things. We did a lot of experimenting. I've just flipped the bike around so we can take a look at it from the other side, because obviously there's a few things that are worth mentioning on the other side, even though most of the action happens on the sexy side of the bike. For example, that, as you can see, we've got original Suntour XC Pro quick releases. Fortunately they came with the hubs as well. But one of the things that's really cool on this bike, and a bit of a silly and excessive thing to do, was I've managed to get hold of a set of XC Pro pedals. These, even in 1990, you were looking at a couple £100 for a set of these. They were ridiculous, and you do not want to know how much a set of those costs now.
You know, in America it's bling bling, but out here it's bling bang, huh?
These are actually ex-demo pedals, they're not brand new. You can see that the graphics have got some slight kind of roughening on them, but the actual pedals themselves are basically in brand new condition. Again, those have got a grease guide port in them as well, so you can re-grease those without taking them off the bike. And of course, being 1990, that was the year that clipless pedals, or clipped pedals as many people now call them, were introduced. So when I got this bike, it had toe clips and straps, so I refitted the same model as I would have had back then. I could have put some SPDs on it, which is what I had, but I would have wanted SPDs from the right year and in good condition as well, and I was really struggling to find a set. So carrying on around the bike, at the front of these Konas you had what's called a Track 2 fork. Now a Track 2 fork is a T6061 crown, and the lowers are chromoly basically. So the lowers actually have an internal taper, so they're butted, and they were famously comfy forks, so they're obviously about the same time as suspension appeared. So I've stuck with the Track 2 forks because, apart from anything else, they are extraordinarily rare. I've had a lot of people comment on this bike at various stages saying, where'd you get the forks, where'd you get the forks? It's got the original forks in it, it's how it came. The only issue I had was with the caps. So the fork cap was missing on one side, obviously not a part I was able to get hold of, so I spent I spent weeks on eBay trying different sized plastic caps that fitted in the top of this fork leg, or didn't in most cases, and after probably 20 attempts I found a model of cap that fitted properly. So now I had to sort of paint those up, have them lacquered and sort of refinished to match the rest of the bike, which was fiddly. It's probably the one part I'm not terribly happy with, because they are a little bit higher. I don't know whether you can see that, they stick up a little bit above the surface. The originals would have been very sort of flush, so it's the one thing I'm not entirely pleased with. So yeah, that's most of the bike. The bike itself is made out of what's called Tange Prestige Concept, which at the time was a real premium tube set. There was a few aluminium bikes around back then, and titanium bikes as well. There was the model above this was the Hey Hey, which was titanium. They were super rare, and I certainly can't afford one of those now, and from a retro perspective. So the Prestige Concept tubes flare. If you look at this seat tube, for example, it's far wider at the bottom than it is at the top, and the same goes for, if you look at the actual top tube, it's far broader depth-wise at the head tube end than it is at the seat tube end. So the tubes are all profiled for performance and for strength. So yeah, that is a tour of most of the bike. It has been, like I was saying, genuinely an absolute labour of love. I haven't done this because I'm going to get anything from it. Quite the opposite, in fact. This has cost me an absolute fortune. But this is the bike that really got me into mountain biking, and it's the bike that has launched me into wanting to work with bikes. And I've been working in the bike industry, running Singletrack Safari, a guiding company, for the last 10 years, and for 2 years before that I was guiding elsewhere as well. So for 12 years I've been riding bikes for a job, and it's because of this bike that I'm doing that. It's the thing that really launched my obsession with mountain biking. I had my Saracen that you'll have seen earlier on before this one, but this was the real the fundamental bike in my history, really. This is the one that I always wished I'd never sold, always wished I'd kept, and that's why this bike is not going to be going out getting ridden. This bike, I'm afraid to say, is going to go on a wall, and it's going to be treasured for the rest of my life, because that is a part of who I am. I love it.